Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2025 Bank of Utah Data Dive Show. Only 1 year of data to get into, but we will cover everything that 2024 offered us in terms of the Black Desert Championship, now renamed to the Bank of Utah Championship. I do have one correction to give. Last night I kept saying that this was in Irvins, Utah. There's no R in the city name. This is in Ivins, Utah. So apparently I was just putting an extra R in the city name. So this is in Ivins, Utah. But we're going to cover everything that we normally cover in a data dive show, albeit with a lot less data since this was a brand new event last year on the PGA Tour. But we have what we normally cover to do, so let's go ahead and get into that. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from FantasyNational.com. Go check out FantasyNational.com. It's the best golf analytic tool out there for your money. You won't regret it. In the description of the video, there are links to all the social media. First off, my X and Instagram, where normally I post research regarding some course information, patterns of previous winners, players in the field that week who've also fit those patterns. Didn't do anything for the Bank of Utah Championship. Quite honestly, just did not get a chance to deep dive into the top five for today. Might try to get something out tomorrow. I'm not sure yet. But with only one past tournament, there's no pattern to try to discover for past champions. But normally, if you want to see the weekly research that I do on the PGA Tour, give me a follow at your preferred social media site. X is also where I place my weekly betting cards and top player usage in the DFS contests I play. That comes out every Wednesday night after the DFS Tactics show. Excuse me. So if you want to see the players that I'm wagering with my money and the players I'm using most often in my lineups, give me a follow over at X. And then lastly, for social media, Gabe's handle's in the description. He writes a great article called The Fringe. I can't recommend it enough. I've enjoyed working with him these past few years. We've got a lot in store for you coming up in 2026. So make sure you're subscribed to his article and go follow him over on social media, show him some support. And then lastly, for this intro, we are live. Chat's open. Want to hear from you all. What do you think of the pricing that came out today for the Black Desert Championship or the Bank of Utah Championship? What did you think of the odds boards? Did you make any wagers? I certainly fired off a few players that appealed to me at their number. So jump in the chat with your thoughts and opinions. And if you're not able to catch the show live, put your thoughts and opinions into the comments. I'll always get to those as well. But we have a lot to get into, so let's get into it. Let's dig into the weeds of the data for the 2025 Bank of Utah Championship. And we're going to start, as we always do, on a Monday evening with the extended forecast look for Ivins, Utah. I'm going to make sure I keep enunciating that since I'm not going to put an artificial R in the city name tonight. But the forecast for Ivins, Utah looks pretty solid for golf. Highs in the low to mid 70s. Perhaps some wind late on Thursday. But, obviously way too far out in advance to declare that there is an obvious wave advantage, if you will. But based on this forecast, you would say that the Thursday AM, Friday PM definitely looks like it has the better of it based on, this extended forecast. Now we have reconnected. So, sorry about that. Looks like my internet decided to go on the fritz for a second. But looks like we are back. So apologies for that. The internet decided to go out for a moment there. But as I was saying before, what I think was the cutoff, doesn't look like we're dealing with much wind. Maybe a little bit Thursday afternoon, probably quite a bit on Saturday afternoon. But we'll update this at the beginning of the show Wednesday night and see if a wave advantage develops. So we're not going to use any wind filters this week, or at least tonight, for Ivins. So with that, we're going to go, excuse me, to Fantasy National, and I need to give you all one more player that has withdrawn. Eric Van Rooyen has withdrawn from the Bank of Utah Championship. Austin Cook has taken his spot. So Eric Van Rooyen is not playing this week. And in fact, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. Let me make sure I remove him from the early look file, because I know he played here last year, finished 43rd. So apologies, I didn't get a chance to do that before jumping live. Okay, so with the two field changes that we have, Sammy Valimaki, Eric Van Rooyen withdrawing, let's take a very, very quick, do maybe like a quick review of what we talked about last night in the initial research. This played very, very easy last year. Very, very easy. Winning score of 23 under. Jaeger was 20 under. There are several holes here at the Black Desert Resort that are, amazing scoring opportunities. Semi-drivable par 4 on the front 9. Extremely drivable par 4 on the back 9. Yielded an eagle more than 3% of the time as a par 4. The par 5s are gettable. More or almost a half a shot under par, quarter of a shot under par, 2/3 of a shot under par. So there are a lot of scoring opportunities here, which means that this is a very, very, or at least it was last year, a very easy tournament. And I don't see that changing for this year. So with that, your top performers in 2025, when rounds have been easy relative to par: Kevin Roy, Cameron Champ, Aldrich Potgeider, Mav McNeely, Kevin Yu, Taylor Montgomery, Michael Thorbjornsen, Takumi Kanaya, William Mao, and Stephen Fisk are your top 10 when rounds have been easy this calendar year. Again, another quick review here from last night, although we're not going to talk about it or use the filter, I should say. Technically, this course does measure over 7,400 yards at about 7,421. But it's not going to play that long. This sits at a decent amount of elevation. I think the highest point on the golf course is 3,000 feet above sea level. So, the ball's going to travel quite a bit further here at the Black Desert Resort. So the yardage is quite misleading. So we're not going to take a look at any course length filters. We're also not going to look at any course architect filters. This is a Tom Weiskopf design, partnered with, I believe it was Steve Miller. Does that sound right? Now I'm going to have to cheat and go back to the tournament fact sheet, so that way I don't lead you. Phil Smith, not Steve Miller. Phil Smith. Tom Weiskopf, Phil Smith design. So we don't have anything for course architect. You could look at calm weather. I'm not all that thrilled with that filter, or all that keen in using that filter. So with that, let's just go ahead and see how, in admittedly 1 year of data, how the Black Desert played compared to the average full field course. Now, we don't want to put all of our eggs into this basket just because it is only 1 year of data. This is a very small sample size, but at least it gives us an idea of how the Black Desert Resort played last year. If we want to if we want to hedge and say that it's going to play similarly this year, we see that approach was the main shot type, which is to be expected, which isn't always the case. It is most of the time the case. It's not always the case. You see like the RSM, except for last year, but still putting rules at the RSM. The Bay Current, the putting was the big deal over in Japan. The Sanderson Farms putting has been the big thing. So, this is this is a course that rewards good iron play. Very, very good iron play, considering you have a lot of contouring through the course. You're going to have to, deal with the elevation change, so adjustment in yardages and whatnot. I'm fully on board with this around the green number. Sorry, as my glasses, I thought I cleaned these off, but apparently I didn't. I'm fully on board with this around the green number. I do not think around the green is going to matter very, very much, considering the fairways here are extremely forgiving, very wide. The greens are they're large, not very large, but they're large. Greens are hit at a exceptional clip compared to the average PGA Tour course. So I do not think around the green is going to play that much of a factor. Now, I am not a big believer in off the tee being the biggest factor. You see that this is a pretty large number. 50% more important than the average full field course. In fact, that might be the largest number going, considering it's only 1 year of data. Like TPC Scottsdale, this reminds me a lot of TPC Scottsdale, so I'm not saying that off the tee won't matter at all, but or somewhere like Vedanta, but I'm not a big believer that off the tee is the be all end all here, especially since, as I was mentioning, fairways were hit very, very very, very often last year. Greens were hit very often last year. So players got more distance last year, obviously, with the elevation. So a player's going to have to be like an Aldrich Potgieter, Cameron Champ type level bomber to gain some kind of advantage here, or they're going to have to be a Brendan Todd level, fairway finder to gain an advantage in that regard. I'm just not sold that off the tee is the biggest deal. And then, of course, we're going to be looking at quite a bit of putting. I don't think this is a full-on putting contest, but it's pretty darn close, in my opinion, especially if it's going to play extremely easy as it did last year. Of course, Matt McCarty wins. You had Stefan Jaeger finishing second, but you had some pretty poor putters with some good finishes last year that didn't necessarily put the daylights out. They were probably above their career baseline, but they weren't gaining 4 or 5 when they normally lose. This isn't a full-on putting contest. So we're going to focus on the main 3 shot types, of course, but I still feel like approach is going to be the main portion of that. Moving across to fairways and distance and fairways and greens. You see, it really did reward ball striking last year. We look at distance, fairways, greens. Fairways, not a whole lot there, just because fairways are extremely easy to hit. I believe it was 85% players hit the fairways here at the Black Desert Resort. These fairways are extremely wide, very forgiving. Distance was a factor. I am going to favor distance over accuracy or fairway finding this week. Not too thrilled with the idea of greens in regulation either, just because these greens are easy to hit, and therefore I don't think good drives gained is something we really want to look at. If we're looking at anything in this page view, I do think it is distance. Moving to scoring, a little bit surprised to see in terms of raw numbers, the bogey avoidance was the big deal at the Black Desert Resort last year. With that said, eagles were a big factor, a very big factor. So this could be something where we might actually look at eagles gained. Put some emphasis in the short par 4s. See who generally takes advantage of those short par 4s. Who takes advantage of par 5s. Not necessarily just birdies, but eagles. Because you see, they really did have an outweigh or oversized importance last year at the Black Desert Championship. So we'll look at birdies are better. I am quite interested to see that bogey avoidance was higher than the birdies gained. So maybe we look at bogey avoidance when it's easy. maybe. Moving to par 3s, 4s, and 5s, kind of the dirty details in regards to a course. You see that par 3s didn't really matter at all. Like, at all. 36% less important than the average full field course. Now, we do have a couple of shorter par 4s. They measured 151 and 152. So you could easily see when tees and pins move, they fall under 150. But overall, just not a whole lot of emphasis in par 3s. Par 4s, again, to be expected. Quite a bit in the 450 to 500 and 500 plus. But I don't think it's going to be... I think we need to look at 0 to 350. I think we need to look at some drivable par 4s as well. Par 4s, 20% more important. I need to do this for you all. I mean, I know that number is astronomical, but just understand not every course has a 500 plus par 4. So that's an extreme outlier. 20% important here. 450 to 500 looks to be the main par 4s. And then for the par 5s, all 3 par 5s on the scorecard measure to 550 to 600. That is where we're going to be focused. Absolutely. Apologies, just checking to make sure I am still up and running. I believe I am. Checking that real quick since I had some internet issues a little bit ago in the show. We'll mainly look at this length of par 5s. And then for proximities, I was interested to see how the proximities looked, considering we had just an astronomical amount of approach shots coming from this length at the Black Desert Resort. Those numbers are pretty big, but really all 3 of these are very, very large. If we take a look at proximities, 125 to 150, all the way to 175 to 200. Big. And these greens are large, so maybe total procs could be something, but perhaps I'm not as keen on the 200 plus. Maybe it's total procs. Maybe we incorporate a little bit more of these shorter to mid irons. Be interested to hear what the community thinks. But there is a look at the Black Desert Resort and Black Desert Championship and how it played last year compared to the average full field course. Good evening, Phil. Thanks for jumping in chat. Very much appreciated. Hopefully you have had a chance to do some research on your own for the Black Desert or for the Bank of Utah. Did you put any wagers in? Did anybody kind of catch your eye in terms of pricing, things of that nature? But it's good to see you in chat. Very, very much appreciated this evening. So we'll go through here, take a quick look at some of the players that we think are going or that have excelled at the metrics that we think are going to be important this week. And we can always double check that with last year's playing of the Black Desert. Like, for example, you had players like Lucas Glover gain 13.5 with the irons. This is why I thought this might be a decent fit for Matty Schmid. Finished top 5 last year. Surprised that he isn't coming back. Very good off the tee. Made a bunch of putts. Frankie Sapan. Interesting. Not somebody I had necessarily on my radar, but we can take a look at him. I was kind of looking at some of this earlier. Like Bo Hostler didn't particularly putt well, but finished inside the top 15. Rico Hoey. This was, Rico Hoey was really kind of field average in terms of irons. He was well above his baseline, but it wasn't like he was gaining 6 or 7 with the putter. He only gained 1. Rico Hoey is somebody that I am quite interested in this week. Elite ball striker. If he can continue to, just be field average and putting. Kitayama was excellent ball striking here and then lost a bajillion on the green. So, we'll take a look at last year too and see if this kind of matches up with what we're thinking. All right. let's go with off the tee. We'll just take a look at the last 36 rounds. If you wanted to try to narrow it down a little bit, maybe you look at off the tee when it's easy, or when off the tee is off the tee, like when fairways are easy to hit. I wouldn't hate either of those. To start, we'll take a look at just total off the tee. Your top off the tee players in the field this week: Rico Hoey, Kevin Yu, Cameron Champ, Jesper Svensson, Pearson Coody, Davis Thompson, Thomas Rosenmuller, Trevor Cohn, Michael Thorbjornsen, and Stephen Fisk. Before I get too far into it, just because I want to make sure I answer your question. Like, Frankie Sapan has not been very good, but he's been elite putting lately. See what he's been doing. Like, I am quite worried with Sapan only because you can't expect him to gain 12.5 on the greens. Like, he lit it up, and he's generally been a good putter on, his short time on the PGA Tour. But this is really, really, I mean, just there's no other way to say it. It's horrendous. It really is horrendous. He wasn't even all that great ball striking with at the Sanderson Farms, despite finishing in the top 10. Did he play this last year? It does not look like he did. So, yeah, I mean, I wasn't too keen on on the person on David Lipsky last night. I think I would more lean David Lipsky than Frankie Sapan. Just clearly based on this. Like, his tee to green has been just horrendous. And you just can't expect him to gain 12.5 on greens. If this were, like, if bent were his best surface, I could maybe understand the argument. Like, if he is a bent specialist playing on bent, maybe I could see it. It's just, this is pretty ugly. That's pretty ugly, Phil. Let's take a look at some more off the tee stuff here. We'll take a look at off the tee. I kind of like, the more I thought about it, the more I like looking at off the tee when fairways are easy to hit, because these fairways are very, very easy to hit. Not that players won't miss the fairway because they're just bombing it, but you can't spray it too much. Kind of like TPC Scottsdale, because you'll be in lava rock and native area, and it's almost an automatic penalty stroke if you're in a different area code. So your top off the tee players when fairways are easy to hit: Cameron Champ, Aldrich Potgeider, Rico Hoey, Luke Clanton, Kurt Kitayama, Kevin Yu, Trevor Cohn, Jesper Svensson, Alex Smalley, Sahith Theegala. Again, you could look at off the tee when it's easy, but the more I thought about it, the more I like that fairways easy to hit idea there. We will go to irons. I think irons are going to be very important this week. Your top approach players past 36 rounds in the field: Kurt Kitayama, Ben Coles, Thorbjornsen, Doug Gim, David Skins, Rico Hoey, Thomas Rosenmuller, Victor Perry, Ryan Gerard, and Christian Bezuidenhout. Before I forget, Phil, one other field change. Sami Valimaki, we talked about last night, withdrew. Today, Erik van Rooyen withdrew. So make sure you are aware of that, or those two players. Sami Valimaki, Erik van Rooyen are out at the Bank of Utah Championship. Not going to do anything with around the green. We're going to take a look at putting. Dan Van Rooyen too. Yeah, Van Rooyen made the cut here last year. It wasn't spectacular. I think he was 41st, 43rd, something to that effect. Black Desert. Yeah, 43rd. He did it all in the short game, which is generally what he does. He wasn't playing all that well lately either. So, it made some sense because he generally plays well when it's easy. Calm winds and stuff. Decent putter on bent, but I wasn't too excited about it. And now that option's just taken away from us anyway. But I did want to make sure you were aware of that, Phil, since I mentioned that early on in the show and hadn't seen you in chat yet. Let's take a look at putting. We'll take a look at bent putting. I'm not going to do a speed filter. If I had to guess, they'd probably be labeled as fast. They were all last year. But I'm just going to keep it at bent for tonight. Your top bent putters in the field this week: Takumi Kanaya, Snedeker, Pearson Coody, Cameron Champ, Vince Whaley, William Mao, Taylor Montgomery, Alex Noren, Ben Martin, and Lonto Griffin. We'll take a look at the spike percentage. And again, spiking meaning players gaining this amount or more in their rounds. Let's do 2. Players that have gained 2 strokes or more in rounds on bent. So Takumi Kanaya has been excellent on bent. Mostly with the Bay Current. Played well at the Bay Current. But also, this year at the 3M had a round where he gained that he technically spiked by my definition of 2. Your definition might be different. That's fair. I'm just going with 2. CJ Cup, Byron Nelson gained, he putt very, very well. So he's putt well on bent in 2025, and he's spiked on bent a lot. So something to keep in mind. Some other notables here, like Ricky Castillo, not a very good putter at all, at all. But he has been slightly positive on bent. Wyndham was Bermuda, Sanderson Farms Bermuda, so that's not really applying there. But gained at the Byron Nelson, didn't play this event last year. I mean, it's a fewer rounds, so take that for what you will. Mullinex, Martin Laird, 25%. Hey, to your credit there, Phil, Frankie Sapan, it's only 8 rounds, but he has spiked a decent amount of the time. Once at the Procore, once at the Byron Nelson, but you see all of the red still in the ball striking. So if your angle is all putting this week, then sure, I can maybe understand the argument for Frankie Sapan. I still would not recommend it, but at least I would that would be an angle you could justify thinking about Frankie Sapan. But I'm not there. Some other notables here that have spiked quite a bit on bent. Troy Merritt's an alternate still. Brant Snedeker, Seabez, Taylor Montgomery, Cameron Champ, Vince Whaley, Mav McNeely, Pearson Coody, 20%. So there's a look at some of the players who have spiked most often on bent greens. Some players who have not spiked very often, like Carson Young, Doug Gim, Norlander, Kevin Yu, Ryan Gerard, your usual suspects, I should say, down here. It's interesting to see that Bo Hostler hasn't spiked on bent, although bent is his best surface. Quite interesting to see that. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to click there. So he's more often than not gained. He's just not like going nuclear. He gained at the Farmers, but that's POA. Shriners last year, okay, but he's more consistent on bent as opposed to the ability to go nuclear. The only other thing I want to do with putting, I know it might seem like we're jumping around a little bit. I apologize for that, but I did bring up the Charles Schwab leaderboard from 2025. These are the same style of greens that the Black Desert Resort has, this 007 bent. And we can take a look at some of the players who maybe putt well at both places, or maybe if they didn't play the Black Desert, see how they putt at the Charles Schwab, like Aldrich Potgieter, Vince Whaley, gained quite a bit. So what did Whaley do last year at the Black Desert? He gained. Was very poor ball striking, but gained. So again, good putting, matching this exact same surface. Just for you, Frankie Sapan, he gained at the Charles Schwab. He actually made the cut at the Charles Schwab, but slightly gained. Some other notables here, like Patrick Rogers, gained quite a bit at the Charles Schwab, and then last year's Black Desert gained the same amount, 5.2, sorry, but still, Patrick Rogers, not somebody I'm always excited about, but very, very clearly likes this 007 bent. Hubbard, there was EVR. Again, like Doug Gim, we saw that he doesn't spike very much. He was very poor at the Charles Schwab. Some others here, like Carson Young actually went really well on this. Like, it was interesting that Bo Hostler didn't putt very well at the Black Desert, didn't putt very well at the Charles Schwab, so maybe that's something to be mindful of, that maybe he just doesn't like this specific strand of bent. Rico Hoey, not a good putter. Shows it here on this 007 bent. Did he play in this last year? Yeah, he played in this. And he gained 1. So that one doesn't match 100%. Gerard, notoriously not a very good putter. Clearly, not a very good putter. Lost 7 at the Charles Schwab. Did he play this last year? No, he didn't play this last year. So I just wanted, I'll keep the 2 leaderboards up in case we have an idea, but I definitely wanted to show some of these players that match, for lack of better terms. They putt well at the Charles Schwab. They seem to putt well at the Black Desert Championship in 2024 as well. So keep those players in mind. We'll move now to distance and greens. Again, the only thing that I really feel great about is driving distance, because these fairways are extremely easy to hit. 84% fairways hit, driving accuracy. Everyone's going to get a lot of distance, so really it's the biggest bombers who are going to have the advantage in that regard. How am I trying to phrase this? It's really hard to separate yourself off the tee at this course because everyone's hitting fairways, everyone's hitting it longer. So the guys that are hitting it just that much further are the ones that are going to separate themselves. So players like Aldrich Potgeider, Jesper Svensson, Kitayama's been hitting it very well. Like, Kitayama played very well at the Bay Current. He just didn't make a putt, but his irons have been still very strong. He was, slightly less than field average off the tee. Thorbjornsen, Trevor Cohn, Isaiah Salinda, Stephen Fisk, Trey Mullinex, Luke List, Tim Whiting are your top 10 in terms of distance the past 36 rounds. That's really the only thing I like here in this page view. If you wanted to really focus on the guys who are long and accurate, it'd be like Thorbjornsen, Luke List, Cameron Champ, Kevin Yu down here to a little bit lesser of an extent, Thomas Rosenmuller a little bit to a lesser extent. But I'm not all that worried if a guy doesn't find a whole lot of fairways. Like I said, these fairways are extremely wide, very forgiving, and these guys are going to have to hit it in a different area code to be in trouble. But it is possible. I believe Thorbjornsen actually struggled here last year, and Black Desert. I thought he might have withdrawn because I think he found himself in the lava rock and got himself hurt. Anyway, there's your top distance players. We'll move to scoring. This is pretty darn easy. We're going to look at birdies and bogey, or birdies are better gained when it's easy. Your top birdies are better gained players when it's easy. Kevin Yu, Matt McNeely, Cameron Champ, Hayden Springer, Michael Thorbjornsen, Joe Highsmith, Carl Phillips, Jesper Svensson, Aldrich Potgeider, Stefan Jaeger, Kevin Roy. Again, skipping Valimaki and Van Rooyen. They've withdrawn. I mentioned that we might look at Eagles. So your top Eagles guys: Stephen Fisk, Philip Knowles, Kurt Kitayama, Billy Horschel, Kevin Roy, Carl Phillips, Bo Hostler, Trey Mullinax, Jason Day, David Skins. Top Eagles players. Okay. Yep. Proximity. I'm going to look at total procs. Now, last night we looked at 175 to 200 mostly. But considering what we saw in Microsoft Excel, it was a lot of this here. So that's why I'm feeling pretty good with total procs. And we'll want to make sure that guys are pretty darn good at mostly these three ranges. I do think 200 plus will play a little bit as well, but we can look at that with 500, with our par fives. So top total procs players: Joel Damon, Ricky Castillo, Adam Schenk, Chris Ventura, Carl Phillips, Kitayama, Hoagie, Coles, Grillo, and Tavis Thompson. Of these players, I would think Damon's probably a pretty good option. He struggles at one of these ranges, but is pretty darn good at the other three. Chris Ventura, pretty darn solid. Acceptable to solid on most of these. Same with Phillips. Kitayama a little bit the same. Now Tom Hoagie really stands out in this regard. Second from 150 to 175, but nothing worse than a 37th. Grillo also stands out. Davis Thompson really stands out. First, and fifth in these three middle ranges. So quite interesting. Henrik Norlander, 5th, 6th, 25th, stands out. Let's see. Sammy withdrew. John Pack a little bit. Sure. Lee Hodges a little bit. Sure. So don't be surprised come Wednesday night. I might have some total procs. Maybe have a little bit of percentage in some of these. We'll see. Not sure how I'm going to approach that yet. I'm going to skip par threes. They just didn't play a factor last year. So if they play a factor this year, I'll be weak to it. Just being honest. But we're going to look at par fours. And then we'll look at a couple of different ranges. But your total par four performers, 36 rounds is fine. Kevin Roy, Noah Goodwin, Victor Perry, Matt Wallace, defending champion Matt McCarty, Taylor Montgomery, Seabez, Patrick Fishburne, Doug Gim, and Gordon Sargent. Now, if we take a look at drivable par fours, Taylor Montgomery, Stephen Fisk, Alex Smalley, Will Chandler, Patrick Fishburne, Adam Schenk, Joe Highsmith, Mac Meisner, Jeremy Paul, and Gordon Sargent are your top 10 in terms of drivable par fours. And then the only other range that would really stand out for me would be the 450 to 500. Seabez, Smalley. So Smalley kind of stands out this way. He might not be great in total par fours, but third in the drivable, second at these, mid to long par fours. Kevin Roy, Lauer, Doug Ginn, Pearson Coody, Lee Hodges, Victor Perry, Noah Goodwin, William Mao, Clanton, and John Pack. And then lastly for par fives, all of them in the 550 to 600, Pearson Coody, Olison, Sargent, Danny Walker, Max McGreevy, Victor Perry, William Mao, Philip Knowles, Hayden Springer, Taylor Montgomery. All right. like I said, not a whole lot that we can really focus on. I will take us to the early look file. This is, performance at that course. Normally in the last 5 years, we only have 1 year of data to work with. But this is how the players performed that are also in the field this week. So you see, putting really kind of dominated, but look at all this consistent performance with the irons. Yeah, McGreevy was slightly under field average. Rogers was slightly under field average. Same with Rico Hoey, but you don't have anyone that was horrendous with the irons that was up here until you get to Tyler Duncan in the top 25. Like, irons are still going to be a pretty darn good deal. Like, you can survive a pretty bad putting week if you do what Kitayama does. I'm still thinking that this is a good fit for Hostler. A little concerned that he would gain 5.5 around the greens when I'm not factoring in around the greens. I just think the putter might come back to his career norms. But then again, he struggled at the Charles Schwab, so maybe that's something that we need to factor in. I would sort on this, but with only 1 year of data, we can just kind of take a look here, because most of the players down here, other than Mark Hubbard, really didn't perform all that well in a particularly important statistic. Like Taylor Montgomery, also a lot of lack of distance, which led to his horrific number off the tee. Was decent otherwise. But otherwise, we'll just take a look and go across here. Just kind of give it an eyeball here. Distance, gonna help, I think. I mean, you look at like players like Stefan Jaeger, Nick Hardy moves it a decent bit. Rogers can move it a decent bit. Bramlett really moves it. Hoey, surprised to see Hoey negative, because he's pretty big hitter. Kitayama. So I do think distance will help. We go across here. Eagles, like Norlander, Hodges, Hardy, Jaeger, they weren't positive in Eagles. So they were more birdies. That's why I'm thinking it's still birdies are better gained. We don't want to have Eagles by themselves. I'm leaning that way. Not a whole lot in terms of par threes. Like if I sort for or look on the guys that were in the top 25, like par threes are a 0.7. Sorry, guys that finished top 21 inside the top 25. Par threes were only like a 0.7, not a whole lot there. Whereas every single one of these players was positive in par fours. Like, you're just gonna have to play the par fours here well. You just do, and you kind of have to take advantage of those short drivable par fours. Rogers didn't. He was very good from the 450 to 500, which is the other range that I'm kind of looking at this week. And Rogers played the par fives decently. So, you're going to have to play par fours extremely well. We're going to have probably some oversized emphasis in par fours this week. Par fives, obviously important, particularly this range. Then proximity. I kind of want to look at proximity a little bit. Matt McCarty was negative in terms of total procs, but he was good in the two long ranges. He's also not a very big hitter of the golf ball. So I imagine his distance was lacking. It was field average, basically. So not that bad. Interesting. But look at these total procs numbers for the rest of these. Like, that's some pretty damn high correlation, if you ask me. Where it's coming can kind of get lost in the shuffle, but this is a lot of correlation for who finished well last year at the Black Desert Championship, now the Bank of Utah Championship. So I'm thinking total procs will be something that we want to look at. I'm still thinking it's the 175 and the 200 plus, but there were players that excelled 125 to 175 that performed well. For example, like Joseph Bramlett was elite, 150 to 175. Players like Rogers and Sig and Highsmith were really good, 125 to 150. So, but consistently, it was mainly these two, I would say. Again, not a whole lot of research that I can do for you. In fact, McCarty only played the Sanderson Farms before, coming or getting his tour card from the Korn Ferry Tour. So, not a whole lot there. Obviously, nothing with the winner matrix. McCarty was the inaugural winner. So, that's what I have for you all in terms of a Data Dive show. Thanks to Phil for jumping into chat. Very, very much appreciated. Thanks to everyone else out there who tunes in, watches, listens, supports the channel by liking the videos, commenting, and subscribing. I always appreciate it. I love what I do. Taking a very in-depth look at golf statistics, giving you a statistician and data analyst view of what he sees, trying to help us all win a little bit of money in the process. The past couple of tournaments, particularly the Bay Current 2 weeks ago, was horrendous for yours truly. I mean, absolutely abysmal. So I'm going to try and get on the right foot as we begin to close out the 2025 calendar year for the PGA. So thanks again for all the support, for all of the wagers you've made so far this week for the Bank of Utah Championship, for all the wagers you're thinking about making this week for the Bank of Utah Championship. And until I see you Wednesday night for the DFS Tactics show, may all your bets be profitable.